last webinar I did, the Getting Started webinar, I basically went through how you can go and take Excel and basically map it into ProPlanner as just a very basic way of getting work instructions into the system. So if you look in here, I have all these routings right now. I'm worried about this one. So this is just a test routing I made. It has 17 stations. So I mapped all those stations in here. And then each of those stations has a set of information. So if I were to run a report for this, see all these stations are going to get printed. And it'll basically look like a big list of things people have to do. Not great formatting because I actually have models and options on here. But you'll basically see, set up this, set up that. Some images are mapped here, some parts are mapped here, some tools are mapped. So it's just a basic work instruction that has steps on what you should be doing, right? A lot of people, and if you're using Assembly Planner, probably you, one of the goals is adding images showing the process, adding videos showing the process to try to make it easier to understand, easier to follow, and less variable. So I'm going to focus on this little pump assembly that I have. So one of the first things you can do is go in here and add an image, right? I already populated my little list to have a pump in there. And then if I go in here and I run a report, I'm going to do the detail report for this station. You'll see that my image gets added. As a note, the quality is not super great of this image. So I apologize for that, but it's hard to get images that have variability in them that I'm actually legally allowed to share. So I have my image on my first one. I could put it on all of them. But one of the things that people have been asking us about recently is I have this, right? But what if I have like the exact same assembly, but it's a different part number, or it's a different color depending on the option, or things like that. Variation that doesn't actually cause a difference in the activity that is being performed, or at least not a substantial enough difference that you want to create a whole new activity, which I'll show you how to create a whole activity at the end here. So let's assume that I have two pumps. I have one that's white, one that's gray, and it depends on the option, which one I'm going to choose. The activity is overall the same. The time's going to stick the same. The only difference is going to be the color of the image, but I do want my image to be right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the activity, double clicking to go a level deeper. Got my steps here. I've got my two possible images here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to look and I'm going to say, okay, so these two options are the two options that cause it to be one or the other. What I'm going to do is I'm going to map my gray pump to the first one, my white pump to the second one. And now if I were to run a report on the station again, and I say I'm running it for this specific option, it should show the white pump this time. So you can see the pump back here, the motor is actually white. That's great, fine and dandy. We can do that basically anytime. It's a big deal anytime you have different colored images, depending on the brand or the language or something like that, where the part numbers might not even change. But the actual look does change. So in order to not confuse people, we added in a little override where you can set the SOP image on the option. And if it's present here, it will use this. Let's say you go through and you actually decide that the part number is going to be different. So it's not solely based on option. It is actually based on which part I'm going to choose. So I've got these parts, and my little example is I'm either choosing A2 or A1 under this parent, depending on which option it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map an option, and this can be done automatically, by the way. We have a function that will take a parent and look up the bill of material and find all the options that are applicable to that parent and that child. But just for simplicity, I'm just going to add a single option. And ideally, you would just know which one to each of these rows, which you can either click the button down here, edit model option data for the row, or right click on the row, edit model option data. It brings up the same screen. So I'm going to do those same two options. And I'm going to say that they are both on page 1, work step number 1, which is page 1 for me. Now, if I run this report, I forgot to do the images. Whole point of this. Okay, so I mapped my options 0, 5, and 2, 5. Okay, I again have an SOP image column here. So what I'm going to do is choose gray and choose white. So depending on which of these two options I filter by, or depending on which of these two options shows up on the order that I'm filtering by, I will either get one or the other. So if I do this AA05, I should get A2, and I should get the gray image. Gray image, A2. If I run it again, but I do the opposite, I should get A1 and the white pump. This time I'm just going to run it from here. So not the whole station, just one activity. So run my report. I get A1 and white. Okay. You'll notice I do have 2 pages here though, and I can only really do this. Well, I am only choosing to do this on one set. If I have another image for the second page, I'm going to add another document by hitting import, adding, or I could drag and drop. I'm going to go into my work step, and I'm going to say the second page should be wiring. So I'm going to run my report again. You should see the same report as before, but this time the second page will have a different image. So I still get white, still get A1, but my second page has this whole other image, which isn't super relevant to what I'm actually talking about. But the point is, you can mix and match all you want on here. And we basically set up a hierarchy of the detail level that you are supplying. So if you supply an image on a specific part, we're going to assume, as that is the most detailed, that that's what we should use. Next, we'll go to the option level. If you have something on the option level, we're going to assume that that's what you should use. So you can see here, I added this picture to the work step for the first page, but it still used this because I have the detail level of this part number should be calling this image. So I'm basically overwriting this image on page 1 with a part specific image. So what a lot of people will do is they'll set their image for the whole activity, or they'll set their image for the whole work step. And then they'll go in and they'll only change the things that require an override, right? The more detailed level that requires an override. So maybe you have one option out of 50. And when that one option comes, I need to assemble something backwards, or I need to leave a piece off because I need to do a sub-assembly later and I can't have that piece in the way. Doesn't really affect the time, but the end result will look a little different. So I go in here and I put that image in for that one option. Otherwise, it's going to use whatever's in the work step or whatever on the activity as a whole, which is what I set back in the operation level, this level. Okay, so the idea behind all this is that you should be able to do configuration where you have a hierarchy, right? You don't need to do all this detail every time. You don't need to go into consumption and every single time map an image, right? You only need to do it on the things that require an override, the pages that require an override, the parts that require an override, the options that require an override. Otherwise, you can do the most general possible. So you can go and do an entire page, you can go and do an entire activity. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. The other option, which is actually what a lot of these are in the Excel that I am basing this off of. The other option is that the time is actually different. The overall, what this looks like is going to be different, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this back. And say that this one is always going to be the gray. So I'm going to remove this 2.5. And I'm going to remove this consumption row. Do I want to do that yet? No, I'm not going to do that yet. I'll do that later. Okay, so effectively what I'm doing is I'm saying this activity has 2 different pumps. And depending on the pump, it's actually going to change the time by enough that I feel like I need to make a new activity. There's a couple different ways to do it. The most complete way is right click on it, move or copy. This is a part that gets everybody, but there's a lot of settings in here. All of them are defaulted based on whatever your application settings are. But basically what I want to do is I want to do a copy. I need to tell it which routing I want to take it from. And which station I want to take it from. So I'm going to copy here. I'm going to copy 2 here, this row, which is actually the exact same station that I'm already in. I'm going to create a new one. And for this example, I'm going to set it to sequence number 999. and then I'm going to check out the moved thing because I'm actually going to own it and need to change it. And I will leave this how it is. So when I hit go, what it's going to do is it's going to take everything. It's going to take the images, it's going to take the models, it's going to take the options, all that stuff. If you just copy and paste using Control C, Control V, whatever, it's only going to take what is on the screen, not all the internal stuff in the background. So you'll see that I got 999 down here. This is my new one. If you pay attention to the IDs, you'll see that there's a big jump between this one and this one. This is the highest number in the database at this point. But basically what I'm doing is I'm saying for the 450, I have to have a new activity. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to make this separate. I do want it to be before this next step. So make a few changes. Okay, so I've got this new line on 450. I still have my old calculated time, but I know that's not going to be right. So I'm going to estimate that it's going to take 1.5 minutes, so just a little bit longer than the calculated time said it would. And then if I go back into here, I can remove the row that I don't need anymore, because I know that this is actually going to be done only if that other activity is called. We can see that we actually did take this time. So this is a whole time study that was done for this activity. I pasted it in here. And when I go to my new activity, you should see the exact same thing. That's the biggest thing, that if you just copied and pasted, if I just did this, which sure, I'll do it right now just for fun. So I just did a copy paste, right? It looks the same on the sheet. But if I go in here into my function, my right click function, copied, I will see the study. But if I go to the one that I just did, Control C, Control V, I don't see the study, and I don't see consumption, and I don't see model option mapping. So that's the big reason to use that right click menu, is to avoid the situation where you have underlying information that gets lost, because it's only copying and pasting what's on the screen. Okay, so that was a mistake. I don't actually want that. So I'm going to delete that activity, say yes, save it just for fun. And then I go back into my actual one, and I know that this option's not right. That's actually for the other one. So I'm going to remove this option. I'm going to click add option, and I'm going to add this 2.5 back. So now I've got this one for my 450s, and for the other two, I have the top one. Proof of it, basically, if I filter by option, you can see that I take this one. If I filter by the other, see that I take this one. Oh, did I mess that up? Oh, I forgot to uncheck it. Well, anyway, I'm gonna have to look at that later now. Dang it. All right. Anyway, the idea behind this is I could then run my report. Oh, that's what it is. I need to delete my A05 part from my newer one. Okay, so if I run my report and I run it for 2.5, I should get this one's gray, this one's white. So if I run it for 2.5, I should get white. If I run it for 0.5, I should get gray. Oh, no, got them both. Okay, if I run my report and I use this one, I should only get gray. 0.5 should only be gray. Yeah, okay. So I got my 7.1, my gray. Okay, so end there got a little confusing, but so hopefully I didn't confuse everybody. But the idea is basically that if your activity is the same, regardless of the option, but you need a different image, you have a bunch of different levels that you can do it in, right? You can set always the SOP image on the entire activity. You can set the SOP image on the entire work step page. Again, you only need to set it once per page. But if you need to overwrite those with a different image based on options, you can do it SOP image in the option mapping, or in consumption. If you have parts mapped, you can override, if a part is called, call this other SOP image. Which is out here, yeah. So the idea is that we set it up to hopefully allow people to do the minimal amount of work to deal with variation. Going through that whole process of copying and pasting and trying to make a new activity with different mapping, that's fine. We do that all the time. But if the time is basically the same and the study is basically the same, at least for line balancing purposes, then there's no reason that an image should drive you to have to create a new activity. You should be able to handle variation in your system with something as simple as just an override on a part or an option. Okay. I think that is basically what I wanted to go over today. Um, just using assembly planner to handle variation within a common activity. Um, the idea behind it is basically people have been asking how to do that. Why do I have to create new activities all the time? Why do I have to have so many activities to handle different models, options, configurations, whatever? Our base rule is if the time changes, the activity is a different activity, right? But if the time doesn't change, if you're cool with considering these two things to be the exact same, then you only really need one activity, and you can handle all of your configuration with image overrides. So um, it's supposed to make it easier. It's supposed to make it less maintenance. The difference between how different customers handle it is also a thing. So whether you are allowed, just in case you already use the system, if you try to use this model option mapping one, if you try to use this consumption one and it doesn't work, if you try to publish it and it doesn't work, um, different different customers have different setups for which one takes precedent, right? Some of them say that if I have an activity, always use that if I have this level, opposite of how it was originally designed. But um, it's just a configuration file that we have set up. So all you need to do is contact ProPlanner and we should be able to help out. Otherwise, that's all I'm going to go over today. Yeah, have a good one.